Lenny McAllister, who has run for the U.S. Congress on the Republican ticket and has been very involved in Republican politics in Western PA for a number of years. Lenny, thank you, sir, for being with me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, John.
So let me ask you first, as you probably know, Allegheny County produced a much larger vote for Joe Biden than it did for Hillary Clinton, leading many to say that Joe Biden won the state of Pennsylvania because of Allegheny County. Uh, do you see it that way?
I think that if you compare Pittsburgh to Philadelphia, the battleground is certainly the Pittsburgh region. So if you're a Democrat, you have to make sure that if you win here, you win by large enough margins so that when you go further east before you get to Philadelphia, you don't lose those margins. So I think that the Biden campaign did a successful job of selling their message here in the Pittsburgh region. And I think there's several things that go to that, Sean. I think number one, when you look at the pandemic, the numbers weren't as high as they were in Philadelphia per se or on the eastern I-95 corridor, but you have an older population here. So when you talk about people that are going to get COVID-19 in Allegheny County, you're also talking about people that are more inclined to be hospitalized. When you start talking about the pandemic and people who are on their last jobs, and if those jobs go away, these are people that are going to be in the long-term unemployment realm for quite some time. When you look at how they're dealing with 2020 versus other cities and other regions, they're probably going to vote from a pandemic perspective much differently than you might see in Philadelphia or in some of the border states. So it's not a surprise that A, Allegheny County came through for Biden, and number two, that it was the swing area between Philadelphia and Pittsburgh to see who was going to win the Keystone State in 2020.
You know, another key point is that in Philadelphia, Joe Biden in the city of Philadelphia did not do as well as Hillary Clinton did, or even as, of course, Barack Obama did. What's your explanation for that? Do you have any thoughts on that one?
I think the former vice president made a series of gaffes throughout 2020 on the campaign trail. If you go back to Charlemagne the God, where he said, well, if there's any consideration that you're not going to vote for me, you ain't black. Well, 20 years ago, that's a joke on a radio show. Charlemagne the God pushed back and said, well, wait a minute. We have considerations that African Americans don't take our vote for granted. You saw other high profile African Americans saying the same thing to the Biden campaign, interacting with the Trump campaign and saying, look, we want the black vote to be considered, not taken for granted from the Democrats that we're definitely going to vote Democrat, or for Republicans that there's no way to earn that vote. As a result, there were some people that may have been turned off, and as a result, the percentages went down. I think one thing that people are not talking about, John, that is overlooked is the fact that this is the first time that Pennsylvania voters could not walk in, hit one button, and walk away. People had to make choices. Couple that with the power of social media and some of the instances that were out there where Joe Biden, another instance was, he considered the African-American bloc a monolith and said, unlike the African-American vote, that Latinos have a lot of diversity within their group. That was offensive to many African-American voters, and I think you saw that on Election Day.
Well, you, of course, are an African-American Republican here in Pittsburgh, and I'm sure you saw the numbers. I mean, we have districts in the Hill District and in Homewood that went from 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 votes for Donald Trump 4 years ago, well over 100 votes this time. What do you think's going on there?
You got 4 years of a record. So you start talking about opportunity zones. You start talking about school choice. You start talking about the criminal justice reform. And you talk about the economy pre-pandemic. There's enough there for people to get behind a president that dominated the media cycles every day for roughly 5 years. From 2015 to today, Donald Trump has dominated the media. So when you have that and you have some successes, that's enough for people to look at their pocketbooks and not necessarily peer pressure and saying, I'm going to vote because they're looking to expand scholarships so my kids can go to a better school than the schools that they're looking at right now. I'm going to vote for Donald Trump because, you know, my cousin got locked up on a criminal charge and was able to get out sooner because of some of the policies that are being put into place at the federal level in regards to criminal justice reform. when you start looking at it from that perspective, it makes sense that the demographic is starting to shift towards looking at Republican policies, not necessarily just Republican personalities, and making a vote from that perspective.
Lenny, do you think there was a gender gap in the Black community just as much as there was in the white community? In this particular case, do you think African American males were inclined to look more favorably on President Trump than African American women?
I think in this instant, yes, but I think people need to be mindful of the fact that they're going to vote differently. African American men and women have different perspectives on life, just as they're going to have different perspectives between white men and white women. I caution to talk about that too much, John, because people see that as being a division between Black men and Black women when we lock arm in arm. But at the same exact time, Black mothers are going to look at issues such as reproductive justice in a completely different way than perhaps a Black male would. And it might be higher on the priority list than it would be for a Black male. Just the same, if you're looking at issues of the economy, Black women are still at the lowest rungs of the socioeconomic ladder here in Pittsburgh and throughout the Commonwealth and the country. They're going to look at a need for somebody to push a little harder for social justice. The Trump administration had recently started rolling back some of those trainings at the federal level. You're probably going to see Black women remembering that as they go into the ballot box versus Black men. So there are some explainable differences, but I don't want people to think that there's this huge division in the Black community just because of Donald Trump. There isn't, but there are certain issues that some voters will vote differently than they would on other issues.
Well, we certainly saw it in the white community because white suburban women were overwhelmingly supporting Joe Biden, much less so among men. So, I mean, I'm not going to speak. Obviously, I'm asking you as somebody who is very familiar with the politics of the African American community, whether you think there's a gender difference there. You're suggesting there may be one, but don't overemphasize it. Did I get that right?
Yeah, don't overemphasize it. And there are instances where they're going to be lockstep as well. Go back 2 years ago with Ron DeSantis. He won that Florida gubernatorial race on the issue of school choice, where Black mothers and fathers voted for the candidate more inclined to keep the scholarship program in place versus the candidate that said they would dismantle it. In a very close race, that can make the difference. Now, when you're talking about over the course of 4 years and you're talking about an incumbent versus a new candidate, unlike the two new candidates in 2018 in Florida, you have a record that somebody can go back and forth with. Plus, DeSantis just simply did not have the reputation for toxicity when it came to rhetoric that obviously Donald Trump has. Some of his supporters love that tone, and those that don't like that tone, it drove them further away. And you can see that with Black women, that was enough to make sure that even if within their households they had to split their votes, they split it between their husband and themselves.
And then finally, forgive me, Lenny, but I am not an expert on rap music. But I have an African American friend who reminded me that Donald Trump's name has been out there in rap music long before he was president, and that it conjures a particular image, a positive image, among many African American males. Is that true? What's your thought on that?
I think it's a nice theory that doesn't hold much water. If you basically took that and try to use it for a glass of water to quench your thirst, you'd be awful thirsty. I mean, the thing is that Black women listen to the rap music too. That theory has a whole lot of holes in it. I think that Donald Trump being out there for 30 to 40 years in the tabloids, being the former owner of the New Jersey Generals, having Herschel Walker speak up for him, who is somebody that's looked up to and beloved by a lot of sports fans around the country, that can have a factor into some of this. But I don't think that people just thought that because Donald Trump's name's been out there, they're automatically Black men are going to vote one way and Black women are going to vote a different way was how it went. Honestly, it's a little insulting to African American men to think that they are so naive to be led by the nose by one little instance of a little bit of fame. That's not how it works. I think that Black men and Black women both equally understand that we have to move policies forward to improve our communities. And they may have just seen things a little differently from a political standpoint going into the 2020 presidential election.
And then finally, Lenny, let me ask you as we go forward, do you think that there's some lessons learned of the fact that African Americans may not have voted for Joe Biden by the margins that the Democrats might have thought? Do you think that's actually going to be a positive in terms of how the African American community is treated in the years to come politically?
Yes, because tone matters and words matter, but so do policies. And I think African Americans are finally at a point in time where they're looking at the policies of the Democratic Party, understanding that cities such as Pittsburgh have been run by Democrats since 1932, and that there's not a big shift in regards to the benefits that African Americans have been getting. Again, we live in the most livable city for whites and one of the worst cities in America for blacks, but that's all the same Pittsburgh. And a lot of that's being driven by Democrats 100% of the time. And African American voters are saying, look, we need a higher level of accountability or else we will vote differently.
Well, Lenny McAllister, always a pleasure, sir, to be with you. Thank you so very much for your insights. It's really appreciated.
Thank you, John. God bless.
Hi, I'm John Delano, political editor for KDK TV, CBS Pittsburgh. And we are with the Democratic political strategist extraordinaire, Mike Minkus. Mike, always good to be with you, sir.
Good to be with you, John.
So let me ask you just point blank, how important was Allegheny County in Joe Biden's win of Pennsylvania?
Allegheny County was just incredibly important to the outcome here in Pennsylvania for Joe Biden. Without Allegheny County improving from what Hillary Clinton got in 2016, we are likely in recount territory. And that's not going to happen because Allegheny turned out and voted in a big way for Joe Biden.
Let me ask you, can we get a little specific? How much better did Allegheny County do for Joe Biden than it did for Hillary Clinton? They both won. How much better did Biden do?
In 2016, Hillary Clinton got approximately 56% of the vote here in Allegheny County. And while they're still counting ballots, right now it's above 59% and might even hit 60% by the time the voting's counted.
And so we're talking about a substantial number of votes. Joe Biden is ahead by 51,000, and he picked up an additional, let's see, well, we can do the math, 146 minus 108.
That's 138,000 votes that Joe Biden was able to pick up, or not 138,000. That's 38,000 votes that Joe Biden was able to pick up. And if people remember, Donald Trump only won the state of Pennsylvania by 44,000 votes in 2016. So Allegheny County more or less erased Donald Trump's lead from 2016.
Mike, let me ask you, why do you think that happened out here?
There are multiple factors, in a lot of blue collar areas that went heavily for Donald Trump in 2016. He still won them, but he won them by smaller margins. Then in suburban communities, places like Mount Lebanon in the South Hills and Wexford in the North Hills, Joe Biden did very well in these communities. He improved on his vote totals and in some cases flipped some communities from blue to red from 4 years ago. And you combine all those communities, even though Donald Trump did a little better in the city of Pittsburgh, and particularly in African-American areas, those numbers add up to a big expansion for Joe Biden.
Let me ask you about Allegheny County relative to the rest of the state, because if I'm looking at these numbers correctly, Philadelphia did not produce for Joe Biden as well as they did for Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama.
That's exactly correct. Not only was turnout a little lower, or appears to be a little lower, that Donald Trump improved on his numbers by a few percent in Philadelphia. The most amazing thing about this election is most of the counties in the state, not all, but most, a majority, became a slightly bluer in communities and counties where Donald Trump won big in 2016. He still won those counties by a big margin. They were just a little smaller. And especially the counties surrounding Allegheny County, Washington County, Westmoreland County, Beaver County, in all of those counties, Joe Biden improved on Hillary Clinton's numbers by a small percentage, typically 1 or 2% at most. And what really did it was his big improvement here in Allegheny County, not just in terms of percentage, but also the margin of votes that he won by.
if I take a look at the counties back east, obviously Philadelphia County is our #1 county. Allegheny is #2 in terms of population. Montgomery County, suburban Philadelphia, is #3. It's my understanding that suburban Montgomery County actually did perform better for Joe Biden than Hillary Clinton. Is that true?
Yes, Montgomery County did, Joe Biden did significantly better in Montgomery County than Hillary Clinton. That was another key county to delivering the victory for Joe Biden here in Pennsylvania.
So is it fair to say that without Allegheny, well, I think you've already said without Allegheny County, his lead would have been well within mandatory recount range. Is it fair to say that Joe Biden won Pennsylvania because of southwestern Pennsylvania?
I think it's incredibly fair to say that southwestern Pennsylvania, both Allegheny County with its big margins and the improvements, small improvements in the county surrounding Allegheny County, delivered the margin of victory for Joe Biden and certainly made sure that there will be no automatic recount here in the state.
Let me ask you then finally about the African-American vote, because it's pretty astounding when we look at some of these districts in the Hill District, for example, or in Homewood. Donald Trump actually did much better. He went from 1 vote or 3 votes or 5 votes to votes in the hundreds. What is going on there?
The big thing, I think, the big takeaway here is that Black men, as compared to Black women, voted for Donald Trump in greater numbers in 2016. I'm not sure why that is the case. There are probably a number of different factors, but African-American men, definitely improved their outlook when it came to Donald Trump. He did much better, and it's not just unique to Pittsburgh. It's true in just about every major city that I've seen in the United States.
Do you think, Mike, that there's a tendency on the part of the Democratic Party, of which you are a strong participant, and perhaps even the media, to try to take a racial group and basically say they're owned by one political party?
I think that is a big mistake by a number of entities, whether it's political parties or if it's the media. The fact is, whether it's African Americans or Latinos or whites or Asians, people are individuals and they vote as individuals. And I think it's a big mistake for anybody to look at any racial or ethnic group and assume that they're monolithic in terms of how they cast their vote.
Well, I very much thank you, Mike Minkus, Democratic political strategist, for taking time with me today. I appreciate your insights. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, John.
There are people in this world who are evil.
I was raised in this